And this is really worth looking at. What does social mean in essence? You know, we keep talking about social media. It's become a standard term, but really social is all about getting on with people. And I really like to reconcile this and say there's nothing that's going to replace an interaction between one person and the other. But one of the key points on this list here, and this is actually taken from a social definition, that's Wikipedia, which is in essence a social site of its own accord. But the one at the bottom there saying, of relating to or based on rank or status in a particular society. I think there's a big risk that that's what drives the content that lives in the social world, and it's not really about what's true, but it's about how do I make myself look a bit better than I am. So I hopefully myself I haven't been guilty of that, because I put nothing up there. So you can make your own decision based on how I interact with you today after this talk, and of course should anyone want to drink later, then as well. So there's also, you know, the other things I like to take into consideration about the aspirations of organisations. It's really, I look at this, the co-op model, and I think these students who come and work for you are actually going to save you a lot of time in the future. When it comes to retention of staff, one of the key things is how you onboard staff. And when we deal with experienced hire in general, or graduate recruits who go straight into a graduate program of some description, one of the most arduous things is actually getting them accustomed to the environment, and also, you know, that whole idea of getting them embedded into the culture. And it's a wonderful opportunity to actually do that whilst you're studying, because when you leave, you're effectively the perfect person if everything goes well. But I think there's a lot of onus on the employing organisation to make sure they maintain a constant level of engagement. So you almost have three phases of engagement here. You have the initial one, which is the talent attraction piece, which is where you get someone to come to you instead of going somewhere else. And I think, you know, that's the same for the universities that partake in cooperative education, which is you want people to join your university as opposed to the others, even though I'm sure some of you here are probably competing for some of the same talent. So you're all going to take this advice and figure out how do we get the best talent to come and join us. But then it's about how do we maintain the engagement during that time, and using social is a great way to do it, but using mobile is even more amazing in terms of the fact that you've got 24/7 access to an individual. I always consider mobile to be a brand in someone's pocket. You're walking around with whatever content you're interested in is always on you. So it's a complete, it's a really great way to maintain a constant engagement from start to finish. And then the really important thing is when people have completed and they graduate, how do you make sure you've still kept them warm? Because what could tend to happen there, and I've heard stories about this just discussing with various people in this room yesterday, that people will complete their course of education and the cooperative element with the terms that they work, and then actually go somewhere completely different. So what's happened there is you put all of this investment in time and of course monetary resource, because everything costs, only for someone to leave you and go somewhere else. And I think that's the greatest loss. We always deal with retention as being probably the worst case. When things go bad, poor retention is the worst case scenario for anything we do in our business. It's quite easy to get people to join, I find. It's much harder to get them to stay or to come back. So that's where the focus needs to shift. I think a lot of what we do from a communications perspective is about how do we get people to come here. I'm much more interested in how do we get people to stay here. And I think that is something that we're going to see. There's not enough metrics about measurement. You know, the concept of, you can say what the cost of hire is, but you can't really say what quality of hire is, because there's no definition. It varies from one person to the other, and you can't really define that until someone's been working for you for maybe 2 or 3 years. So those are the metrics I'd like to see come into the fray a bit more frequently. And of course, you know, mobile and social are the greatest bedfellows. They're inextricable. Facebook now has more people accessing Facebook content in terms of minutes on mobile devices. That's tablets as well as handsets, than on desktop or laptop. And I think anyone in this room would attest to that. You're probably all tweeting or Facebooking something throughout the course of today. You always have a quick peek at it. One of the things that was always a prohibitive factor in the workplace is that they would have draconian IT policies which stop you from accessing Facebook on an internal network, but it doesn't stop people from using it. They'll just go and use it on their phones, right? So the mobile device has now made social even more prevalent, and I think there's some wonderful things to be said about how people deal with information and share it in the mobile world. So that leads me nicely onto some localized information here. I actually went and did a bit of research about mobile usage in Canada. And it's interesting to see that you've got over 50% penetration in the audience demographic that we're interested in here, which is sort of the 18 to 29-year-olds. In fact, with college students, that's slightly greater. It's a bit more than 60%, and within the next 2 years, I think the saturation of smartphone ownership amongst college students is going to be around 85 to 90% in Canada. In the US, they're projecting that it's going to be about 96%. Within 2 years. So that's something to bear in mind. More minutes are being spent on these devices than ever before. And of course, you know, you have to take into consideration what is important to people when they use their phone. And this one, I really want you, I urge you to pay attention to this. The big bar in the graph there is the percentage of people who never leave home without their phone. And I think, you know, the phone is actually the most important thing. There are many reports that are saying people are more bothered about losing their phone than their keys or their wallets. My passport's the one thing that I don't want to lose above and beyond anything, but my phone is probably the next one. But the interesting one is beneath that, which is 63% of smartphone owners expect websites to be as easy to use on their phones as they are on their computers. Now, this is something you really have to pay attention to. If you haven't got a mobile optimized site, you are actually doing yourself a grave injustice, and you will alienate people immediately, because what will happen is they'll be following some type of marketing strategy. They'll click on a link that takes them through to your website, and then they get a very bad user experience. And when I say user experience is bad, there'll be a number of things that contribute to how bad it is. So I'm going to actually run through some best practice from a mobile site perspective and answer a few questions about that. And I think it will set you all up really well to kind of go back and to do a bit of an audit of what you've currently got and say, actually, we need to really address this and possibly go and find the budget to do so. This was just the statistic here I was telling you about the students who own smartphones here. All of this leads to a philosophy that we adopt as a business and as an industry as a whole for advertising and communications, which is to think mobile first. It's super important that you don't put mobile as a secondary consideration anymore, especially for the audience you're looking to engage with. It should actually be the first thing you think of. And what we did historically is we built websites, we did all sorts of digital engagement, you know, using display advertising, which typically you look at as banners, for instance. But nobody really thought of mobile as being that important. So one day mobile became important and everyone said, ooh, we need to do something mobile, and built a little site that wasn't that great, or they thought they had to build an app that didn't really address the issue. It's really, the mindset you need to adopt is to actually think of mobile as the most important thing, and everything else is built upon that. It's what you call progressive enhancement. And I always ask people to perform a little bit of an exercise. So when you look at your website, what are the 3 most important things that you would want people to either be able to read or learn about you or do? So this is a cathartic exercise for your content. How do I look at all this stuff that we've thrown onto the website? For time immemorial, we've been told, put this, put that. You're struggling with everyone about, you know, who gets the important bits on the page. But the reality is, if you stripped it right down and you said, I've only got a space for 3 things, what will those 3 things be? Then you are in a really great place. And then you build up from that. And I like this analogy here with the M&M. The most important thing in a peanut M&M is the peanut, right? The shiny stuff, the candy-coated shell, as it were, makes no difference. If you were to blind taste 5 M&Ms, you couldn't tell me one was green, one was blue, one was yellow, one was red. They'll all taste of a peanut, because that's the most important thing. So I think this is a really great way of illustrating the need to avoid shiny object syndrome. I think sometimes we focus too much on how it looks and we forget about what's inside it. So if you want to go and, you're throwing this back to someone who's doing a design, and you look at the design and say, it looks great, but it's really got no substance, just tell them about the peanut M&M and they should get it straight away. The other thing is that we're delivering for different types of user interface. At this moment in time, people have moved away from pointing and clicking using a mouse, and now they're using gestures. And that actually creates a number of challenges from a design perspective when it comes to making something that's user-friendly. You have to make your links a lot bigger, or clickable areas should be a lot bigger. Should I say touchable areas? Actually, there's a term for this, it's called the pursuit of tappiness. Tappy being what you do on your phone, right? We'll write a book about that at some point, a user interface for mobile devices. But the key thing here is people are pinching, they're swiping, they're tapping, they're not using the traditional user interface tools that they did in the past, so you have to change your design accordingly. All of this seems like it's a really big challenge, but actually if you get the opportunity, you can start using something like responsive web design, which is a relatively modern technique, which allows you to facilitate all of these things for different types of form factor with one site. Now, one of the perennial discussions I come up with people is, do I need a separate mobile site, and or can I use the existing site? Well, responsive web design is a great solution if you've got an opportunity to build a site from scratch. If you're in that wonderful position we find ourselves in once every 5 years, where you've got the budget to rebuild your site from the ground up, the way to do it now is to take a responsive approach, which means, as you can see from the bullet points there, that it will change according to the width of the device that is requesting the page. So, and I'll show you a real live example of this, and I think then you'll go, wow, I totally get that. It means you don't have to build 3 different sites, one for tablet, one for desktop, one for handset. You build the one site, and then it will scale according to the width of that device. And the reason why this is so important is because we make an assumption at the moment that the mobile devices we use are handsets, tablets, but actually in the future they could be anything. It could be your watch, it could be on your car. For instance, I'm seeing a lot of cars coming out with internet-enabled screens in them. It might be on your fridge. In fact, television's a big thing as well. We actually seem to forget that television is still the #1 device for media consumption in terms of sheer volume of people who look at it and hours spent. Having said that, we haven't even realised the potential for internet delivered through the TV. So I don't know if anyone here actually bought a smart TV. Have you seen these new devices now that get all of your internet content through your television set? At that point, you really start to think about, well, actually, this is a completely different form factor, which is kind of unaccounted for, because we've got our heads stuck in this sort of portable thing, but actually it's about all devices. So the idea with responsive design is that you can approach the website with one site that scales accordingly. And let's see if I can switch my window effectively and show you this. So this is Mashable, which is a wonderful technical resource site. In fact, if you took nothing else away from this speech now, Mashable.com is a great thing to take away. It's got great statistics to build your arguments for improving things and for gaining that extra budget. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change I'm just going to make that fill the screen. Hopefully this will work. Yeah, here we go. So that's the full screen. And then as I move it, you see how all of the content actually modifies. I'll just go and deselect that. So you can see it's totally shifted the orientation of the images and the menu items. So now it's got that menu over here. It's moved the images into the left-hand column. And then as I make it wider, it automatically changes the use of the page. And now it's actually got more screen real estate, so as a consequence we can make those images much bigger. And then you can see what's happened here. It's moved the menu items out of that drop down on the left-hand side to be drop downs at the top that take up the whole page. So you can see the benefit of that immediately. And if you think about that from a possible careers perspective, when you shrink it down to the smallest size, you can actually focus on the search for job opportunities. And then when you increase it to the biggest size, you can look at the employee profile as an example. So responsive web design could well be your savior, but there are a number of other things to take into consideration, and a lot of it's to do with how much budget you've got at your disposal.